So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where NATO and Russia go to war. Tensions between NATO and Russia have been pretty high recently considering the Ukrainian conflict. So let's go ahead and take a look at a scenario where the two sides go to war. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Now in a war between the two sides, nuclear bombs are likely to be used. Now I'm backtracking, I didn't used to say this, but now after some comments made by Putin, seems that nuclear bombs are likely, which is sad because using nuclear bombs would most likely end the world. But in this video, we're just going to be focusing on conventional warfare, so no nuclear bombs. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So starting this war, we're going to be building off the Ukrainian conflict. So as of March 3rd, this is pretty much what the front lines in Ukraine look like. So we have Kiev right here, which is looks like the Battle of Kiev is about to take place. But moving back from that, let's just go ahead and fast forward a little bit. So looking ahead, we can see a front line that might look like this, and then maybe one that looks like this. But let's go ahead and just kind of start the World War III here. Over here on the Ukrainian and Polish border, let's just go ahead and say that some Ukrainian troops decide to retreat into Poland in order to escape getting killed. We have some Russian soldiers who follows them across the border without knowing that it is in fact the border. The Ukrainian soldiers meet up with Polish soldiers, and the Russian soldiers follow suit. The Russian soldiers, thinking that the Polish soldiers were also Ukrainian, starts to open fire, and we have ourselves a World War III because an attack on one is an attack on all. Now, it's hypothetical, but it's definitely not impossible to see that happen. Obviously, right away, Poland will join, and then that would activate NATO. So here we have our complete activation of NATO. So all 30 member states are involved now. And seeing as this was an accident, realistically, there would probably be some diplomatic talks in order to end this. But let's just go ahead and say that those fail and war continues. Nuclear bombs are launched. Russia tries to nuke Europe. USA retaliates. World ends. That's the realistic route for this, but we're going to be taking a look at conventional warfare, as I said. So let's go ahead and start with that. As we know, NATO has been increasing their forces in the Baltics, Poland, and Romania. And with this, we have troops that are ready to defend, and we might have some troops that are ready to invade. It's safe to say for the first couple of days, there would be no progress made on either side, but eventually we would most likely see something take place down here in Ukraine. First of all, we would have a lot more morale in the Ukrainian army, because being pushed back this far, obviously, is not a good thing. You know, Kiev has fallen. Your country doesn't look like it's going to last much longer. But with NATO joining in, your morale might be boosted. Obviously, your supplies would also be boosted, and your troop number would be boosted. So with this, we can assume that the Ukrainians would start to gain hope again and fight back. But anyway, Polish and Ukrainian forces start to push back Russia and Belarus, as well as NATO forces crossing over into Belarus. Now, assuming that Russia has mobilized its entire army at this time because of the whole Ukraine problem, they sent in a third of their army and aren't doing too well. So let's just go ahead and assume that they mobilized another third, or maybe even all of it, just to get Ukraine out of the way. So finally, we have those forces arriving in Ukraine and starting to sweep through the country. Eventually, we see a meetup with NATO and Russian forces, and the first major battles start to take place. The Russians would use the Black Sea to their advantage and push down into Romania, and the Russians would most likely also invade Moldova for a more strategical approach. Now, if you didn't know, there has been leaked plans for Russia to invade Moldova, which is frightening because, once they're done with Ukraine, they're going to keep going. So yeah, that's worrying. But anyway, after taking over all of Moldova, we have a lot of countries around the world starting to get angry. There's been 141 countries just condemning Russia for what they've done in Ukraine. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a majority of those countries join in on this war and just form a giant coalition against Russia. But then, of course, Russia also has its allies. Iran is the most likely candidate to join Russia as an ally. We could also see Iraq. And China and North Korea are definitely on the table for now. I'm not going to add them at this point in time because I don't think they would join right away. Because, China, they've been taking an interesting approach to the whole Ukraine thing. They've been like, Russia should respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, but NATO shouldn't be expanding. And then it's kind of been like a neutral kind of thing. So yeah, they're staying out of the war for now, but back over in Europe, we have some frontline changes. Iraqi and Iranian forces start to push up into southern Turkey, and Russian forces push down the coast of Bulgaria. Now, with real conventional war in real life, this would not be a good war for Russia at all. NATO has around 3 million troops, while Russia has around 1 million. The US alone also has 1 million. So it's not going to go well for them. The sanctions that Western countries have put on Russia are crippling its economy, and a lot of people said that wouldn't happen, but it is indeed happening. Russia doesn't care, though, which has already been proven as they invaded Ukraine and the citizens are being arrested. We already know that Russia doesn't care, but we can assume that they're just going to keep going here. Finally, we see some stuff happening over here in the Baltics. Russian forces cross over to Latvia and Estonia, while down south we see NATO forces push out from Lithuania into Belarus. The next country to take a side on this war is Georgia, so they join in on NATO's side, and we also have Azerbaijan joining in. Followed by this, we have Finland and Sweden. Now, both of these countries have stated that they're not going to join NATO, but they are definitely majorly NATO leaning at this time. I feel like they would only join NATO if they felt absolutely threatened by Russia. And Russia has been threatening both of these countries, but I don't think it really scares them. They're Nordic after all. But anyway, with the addition with these two countries, we have a new front being opened over here in northern Russia. We start to see major US allies starting to get involved, so we see Colombia join this war. And in turn, we see Venezuela and Cuba join because Russia is backing both of those countries. We could see Nicaragua join in on Russia's side because they've said that they're pro-Russian at this point. I don't know if they would because they just get clapped by everyone around them. But overall, we do have some countries in this world starting to pick a side, such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Qatar would just be neutral. They play both sides, really smart. Yemen, which is an interesting one, would probably join the war in some way or another. And we could also possibly see Oman join in, although I'm not too sure about that one. It would be a very different war if China joined in. And honestly, let's be real here. China, in one way or another, depends on the West for economical reasons. And in turn for that, the West also relies on China for economical reasons. So it wouldn't be very smart for China to join in, although with the addition of China on the red team would have a greater chance of winning or even stalemating. But I don't see it too likely that China would just join in, even because Russia started this war with the troops pushing into Poland. And seeing how the world is reacting to Ukraine and Russia, it seems that the aggressors are always, well, obviously the aggressors are always not in the light. So we see a lot of countries kind of condemn them, as we've been seeing with Russia and Ukraine, as I said. And with how China's reacting with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I don't see them getting involved with a Russian NATO war just because, like I said, Russia was the aggressor. Now, Africa is a really interesting one, and especially Northern Africa, because this place is it's really weird on how they pick sides. So I know a lot of them are pro-Russian. For example, Morocco. And then on the other side of that, we have like Syria. Speaking of Syria, they officially joined the war. Now, honestly, I don't think Israel and Palestine would join in on either side because, they're fighting each other. And then, of course, what would be the point? India would definitely stay neutral, even though Russia is the aggressor. Pakistan and China have not joined the war, so they don't have a reason to join against Russia. And then again, Russia is the aggressor. They're fighting against the UK and the USA. So they don't have a reason to join in on on Russia's side. I don't really see any of these countries getting involved at all without China being in the war. So with that, we have none of the oceanic countries joining in, other than Australia and New Zealand, of course, because it's Australia and New Zealand. So with this, we do have some likely contenders for each side. So on Russia's side, like I said, China is a likely contender, although most probably not. And then of course, North Korea is also a likely contender. Japan and South Korea could join in on this war, but that might activate China. It would probably be of their best interest to not join in. Mongolia is definitely a likely leaning Russian, although they wouldn't really contribute much. Pakistan, Armenia, both likely Russian allies. And then on NATO's side, maybe Mexico, maybe Brazil. Brazil's kind of been weird about the whole thing. Probably not Argentina. Maybe Morocco, maybe Ethiopia, and then I think that's all. Oh, and then of course in Europe, Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Ireland, both likely. Serbia would probably be very smart about this and not join in because, as you can see, they're surrounded by blue. But with this war and with the West most likely winning it, we would see a very different world. And I'm going to talk about that more after we see the West win. So finally, we have the Western forces being fully mobilized and start pushing back Russia. Russia is kicked out of Bulgaria and troops push up into Romania in hopes of taking out Russia. We see a majority of troops pushed out, a small push into Moldova is started, and the recapturing of Ukraine is started. Up north, we see Belarusian forces fold, and a small encirclement made of Russian forces in northern Ukraine. These forces are then wiped out, which gives way to more land being retaken by NATO. Finnish forces finally cross the border and start taking areas of northern Russia, and at this point we have St. Petersburg being threatened. Over in the Caribbean, the US manages to take out all of Cuba, and down south with US aid, Colombia starts to push into Venezuela. Turkish forces push down into Syria, while Iranian and Iraqi forces push up into Turkey and Azerbaijan. Russian forces also push into Georgia via their claims that they already have, and with this we have a pretty bad situation over here in the Caucasus for the blue team. But over in Europe it is going a lot better as NATO forces push across Ukraine. Eventually all areas of Ukraine are liberated other than the Donbass region, and Crimea is reliberated. Russian forces are pushed out of the Baltics, and one large front line starts up in Europe. The first major development in this war is the capturing of St. Petersburg. With this, we have the Russians losing control of northern Russia, hence it falling over to Finland. We see the Russians kick completely out of Donbass, and a reverse invasion is started. We finally have the capturing of Kaliningrad, and overall, NATO is doing very well in this war. Now talking about European countries that can join in once again, This is the first time that I'll ever be saying this, but Switzerland could possibly join in, and that's a weird sentence to speak because Switzerland is technically no longer neutral, and that's it's really interesting. To also speak, Moldova is no longer neutral, Andorra, Switzerland, as I said, and a lot of these microstates are just no longer neutral. Moldova applied to join the EU after the leaking of Russian plans to invade the country. So Moldova is a EU candidate now. Ukraine is a EU candidate, although I'm not sure how that's going to work with them getting invaded. Now, this is taking into consideration that the process for these countries joining is going to be sped up just because of the war situation. I think Georgia's process is also getting sped up, so we can see the EU expanding in these coming years. Back over in South America, we see US and Colombian forces completely kicking out Venezuela. In the Middle East, we have blue team forces taking over Yemen. Saudi forces push up into Iraq. Eventually, they meet over with Turkish forces in Syria. NATO's advance into Russia is continued and even sped up as the Russian army loses morale. We see NATO forces push over to the border of Kazakhstan, and promptly Russia is split into two, so we have obviously the rest of Russia. Then we have this very strategical area down here next to the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. So with this, we have NATO forces starting to sweep down, Turkish forces sweep up, and this entire area falls to NATO. With this, NATO's advance into Russia is continued until eventually the alliance is at the gates of Moscow. I did this in a similar video, and I will be doing it again here. So here we have Moscow, the city, and here we have NATO forces advancing towards the city. And then just for better reference, here's the outskirts of Moscow. So I guess technically everything that sits within this is the city, and then this is obviously like the Kremlin itself. So NATO forces start to advance towards the city. We have a NATO flank heading north and a NATO flank heading south. In the middle here, we have two NATO divisions pushing towards the city in order to connect these two flanks. I'm going to be using the word flank a lot here, but off the northern flank, we see another flank form, which goes to encircle a Russian army stationed here. And then, of course, we have the main flank pushing around over in Moscow. We do, however, see a Russian defensive flank come in. So in the south, we see Russian forces start to push up and push back the southern flank. This goes pretty well and pushes NATO back from the city. Although with the encirclement of the Russian army up north, we have a big chunk of land being ceded over to NATO. With this, defensive units are set up on this northern flank area, and the main forces are moved down south in order to counter this invasion. We do see a little bit more progress being made by the Russians, but eventually those forces do arrive, and we have not complete annexation, but we do have these forces pushing back Russia. All in the meantime, though, we do see this NATO flank continuing to push around the city and closing in on it. The southern Russian flank is finally kicked out, and the southern NATO flank is reestablished. Up north, we see yet another NATO force push up and into Russia. This force is mainly focusing on cutting off infrastructure, so it does have a little bit of a weird path. Same thing happens down south, so we have another force pushing out in order to cut off infrastructure. But with this, we finally have the northern and southern NATO flank meeting up and cutting off Moscow from the rest of Russia. The two flanks on the outside meet up, and a large NATO defensive force is pushed into the area. We eventually see the stranded Russian troops over here push back into Moscow, and with this, the outskirts of Moscow falls. So at this point, this is what it looks like. So obviously we have NATO pushing over to Moscow, and then of course they're advancing on all other fronts. Now for the Battle of Moscow itself, we have NATO forces pushing up from the south and from the west. This is once again where the main NATO force is, and they enter the outskirts of the city. With all hope lost and NATO crushing in from all sides, we eventually have Moscow falling to NATO forces. And that all happened in one little tiny speck on the map, which you can even barely see. So with this, of course, we have Moscow falling, and NATO continuing their advance until further notice. Down south, we see Syria fall, as well as Iraq, and the Iranians are kicked out of Turkey. With this, forces start to invade the country, and eventually, with pretty much no more contenders in this war, we have Russia and Iran surrendering. So taking a look at this peace treaty here, we have a less kind of violent peace treaty than I usually do, because it's more realistic. Starting in Europe, as always, we have Finland taking over a lot of northern Russia. This is just the normal in most of my videos. So we have Estonia and Finland finally bordering, and then Latvia gets some Russian land, and Lithuania gets some Belarusian land. Poland gets Kaliningrad and a little bit of Belarus. Ukraine gets even more Russian land, which now that I think about it, probably isn't the best thing, but they do get Crimea back. Georgia gets a big chunk of land out of southern Russia, and Azerbaijan connects its exclave. Turkey annexes all of Syria and gets a chunk of northern Iraq. Saudi Arabia takes over the majority of Yemen, but Oman does become this Chile of the Middle East. Norway does get a little bit of land, although I'm not sure if that's too realistic. Over in the Caribbean, we have Cuba becoming a part of the United States, and Colombia gets a lot of southern Venezuela and a little bit of western Venezuela. The rest becomes a US puppet. Iran gets a new government, Iraq gets a new government, Belarus gets a new government, and then of course Russia gets a new government. So with this, we're actually going to be taking a look at a new kind of format that I usually do. We're going to be taking a look at NATO and the EU after this war. So here we have the NATO alliance after this war. Now, this could actually go one of two ways. Without Russia being a threat, we could see like NATO's downfall, or not downfall, but a lot of countries leaving. And then, of course, we would also have the opposite effect, which is what is shown here. More countries joining NATO. So the first country to join is Colombia, followed by Sweden and Finland. Down south, we have Ukraine finally joining, Moldova, Georgia, and I think that's all. Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo, because without Russia, Serbia can't really do anything. And Kosovo just kind of goes its own way and becomes a proper independent nation. Not that it already wasn't. So now looking at this, let's go ahead and take a look at the European Union. And yeah, it's probably what you expected. A majority of Europe being in the EU. Now, Russia here, maybe because the new government might want to join. And Belarus, most likely because it's smaller, easier to control. And then, of course, we have all the EU candidate states joining in. So Georgia, Turkey, Bosnia and Herzegovina. All those countries join in. Moldova now, Ukraine. We could also see Serbia finally join in, with them becoming more Western, I guess. Because, without Russia, Serbia doesn't have anyone to fall to other than Western countries. The UK, with new leadership, could probably rejoin the EU, which now we have the entire continent of Europe in the EU, which makes sense, European Union. And honestly, I wouldn't push it too far to say that Switzerland could join the EU. So with this, the European Union is finally a union. There would probably be no unions at all, but it is one ginormous economical continent now. So yeah, that's going to do it for this video. So if you guys enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. So yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I'm doing a live stream tomorrow, so this video goes out on the 3rd. Or not the 3rd, my bad. This video goes out on Saturday the 5th. There will be a live stream on the 6th talking about Ukraine. And yeah, if you want to show up to that, then that's happening tomorrow. If you're seeing this on the day it's published. If you're seeing this the day after, it's probably live now, but that depends on when you're seeing this. And if you're seeing it in the future, that means you missed it, although you can probably still watch it. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. That really helps me out and shows me that you guys are enjoying the content. Leave a comment if you have anything interesting to say, and I will see you guys in the next video.